All right, so it's time to talk about the busy Wednesday action of match week number 19 as we have 11 games that's going to be happening on Wednesday night. With at some point of the Wednesday night action, there could be about 7 or 8 games that is happening at the same time. And unfortunately, at that time, I won't be able to watch those games because I will be at work on Wednesday from 10 to 6:30 p.m., which means, yeah, I am going to miss most of the action. And it's kind of frustrating the fact that this week, even though I'm not gonna get off work that late, it is still late enough where a lot of these games are kind of taking place at the meat of the action, which is like around 7:30, 8 p.m. Eastern and so forth. But I, of course, will still watch the highlights once all of these games is over, and I'll probably do the review of these games probably on Thursday because on Wednesday night it's gonna be a little bit tight, and it's gonna take a lot of time for me to watch the condensed version of most of these matches. But that being said, let us actually begin with the first game of the busy Wednesday night action, which is Atlanta United versus Toronto FC. And I just realized I didn't put the kickoff time for the top row on this board, but this game will be starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Actual kickoff time is 7:08 p.m. local time. And oh, by the way, there is no national televised game in terms of the midweek action, which shouldn't surprise you because usually in terms of midweek action, it's not usually going to be national televised by FS1, ESPN, or even by 2DN. But yeah, Atlanta coming into this game, they're definitely in the up after winning 1-0 against LAFC at home, while for Toronto, they're still searching for that second half resurgence to kick off, as they have only now won 1 in the last 7 games. And really the key points, and talk about the second half resurgence, can Atlanta continue to do so? I mean, things have definitely looked up for this Atlanta team after what happened a couple of weeks ago when they were still on that historic franchise long winless run. And this is a good example of what happened when you finally can end your long winless run and get back to winning ways. You can definitely start a run, and it just seems like Atlanta is going to do so right now with the second half resurgence. But for TFC, can they actually kick off the second half resurgence? I mean, I talk about so many times that eventually TFC is going to do it, but when you look at the resort that they have, it still kind of is very similar form to the one that they were under Chris Armas. And if they want to start a second half resurgence, this is the opportunity to do so, and especially against a team that they might have to, or one of the many teams that they have to chase in terms of getting above the red line, because right now I believe they're currently still sitting at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and if they really want to get themselves back to playoff conversation, they have to start winning, because if the longer they're not going to start winning, and the closer we get to the end of the season, the more likely TFC might be the first team you could say in the East that, yeah, they're pretty much done. And it's pretty much they're going to be in see you next season mode. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be New England versus DC United, as this game will start at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:08 p.m. local time. And this is another matchup in the midweek action where, there are a couple of these that I definitely will keep an eye on closely, and some that, I recommend you to really watch this, because this could be a matchup where there could be a lot of goals that can be scored in this game. I mean, both of these teams are known to do well on the attack, and especially for when I've seen these last couple of DC games, with what Hernan Losada has implemented this pressing system, it kind of really reminds me of the days when Almeida decided to kind of do the man marking system, where you're gonna see some crazy kind of resort in some of these games that the Quakes, of course, have been playing. And that, even though Losada's system is nothing like what Almeida is doing, at least there kind of is a similarity where you expect there should be some chaotic kind of resort when you see DC United game. And hence, it's not surprising when you look at the past couple of DC games, the scoreline has been just absolutely crazy. Like the last resort, they unfortunately lost 5-2 to Nashville SC away, but previously they were able to score like four goals against Columbus, and it's quite crazy. But the Revs, of course, they are leading the Supporter Shield standings by 6 points, and they're pretty much kind of almost like at the LAFC level that we seen a couple of years ago, where they're just on a different island right now. Like, they are head and shoulder above every single team right now in MLS. And the question for them, and really the key point for them, is can they continue this unprecedented run in that they have in the last couple of games where this team just cannot stop winning. Like, it has to be very frustrating if you are the team that is currently in second. And really, I think right now when you look at the Eastern Conference, it's no longer the battle for first place in the East. It's really a battle for second place because of how New England has really just kind of completely separated from the pack. And, barring any late season collapse, there's no doubt New England's going to win the East, and they're probably going to be the one that's going to get the by heading into the playoffs. But that being said, this is a good test for them facing against a team that they might face in the playoffs in the first round. That is DC United. And really for DC, the question I have in the key points is, does Losada need to consider a plan B option when his pressing system doesn't work? And I kind of mentioned this before with Almeida, where, another thing that I think Almeida and Losada is very similar is that they like to stick to their gun. And Losada basically even said that he's going to ride and die in terms of this tactics that he used, which, yes, it's good the fact that you decided to do so. And, sometimes I do like head coach decide to stick with the tactics. It doesn't want to change that much, because when you change the tactics a little bit, it can really kind of upset the balance of your team. And sometimes when you decide to change too many tactics, then it could cause the team to not be able to find an identity. But the problem is, sometimes when you do stick to your gun and sometimes it doesn't work, there's that old phrase of definition of insanity, and I really hope Hernan Losada doesn't fall on the same track that Almeida was a couple of years ago, where, the thing that I was so frustrated with Almeida is that he was just being very naive and kind of just doesn't want to go with plan B when the man marking system doesn't work. And hopefully for Losada, this is not the same thing where he really means that he's going to stick to his gun, and even if it ain't going to be working, he's just going to continue to work for it. And the last game is not a good example of what I hope Losada would do, which is continue to have a plan B option, because even when they were losing like 4 or 5-2 against Nashville, they were still doing the tactics that they started in the game against them. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be FC Cincinnati versus Montreal. So this is a matchup between both teams that, actually for one team, they're still looking for their first win at home, and also looking for their first win in 5 games, as Cincinnati is winless in 5 games, while Montreal, I was going to say that they also were looking to end a winless run, but then I realized they won their last game against the Red Bulls at home 2-1. And if you didn't watch that game, and especially what happened in that stoppage time with the penalty kick fiasco, I recommend you to watch the game, because that was just some insane thing that you rarely see happen in MLS. But in terms of the key points for both of these teams, for Cincinnati, is this finally the game that Cincinnati can get their first win at TKO Stadium? And there's a good chance to do so, because Montreal this season has been kind of inconsistent, and they haven't really done very well so far this season on the road. And if there's one team that Cincinnati does have a good history against, it's Montreal. Even though I know the last match, finally Montreal gets their first win against FC Cincinnati. But hey, when you look at the past 5 head-to-head matchup, FC Cincinnati surprisingly has been the team that just have Montreal number. And for Montreal, can they continue the momentum after surviving that dramatic PK fiasco with a win, and can they continue to have that good luck against FC Cincinnati that they showed in the last game, where, the last time both of these teams faced off against each other, it ended 5-4 in favor of Montreal. Now, I don't expect that's going to be the scoreline heading into this game. In fact, that scoreline, I think that was the last game I would have think it would be a high scoring affair, because both of these teams are not known in terms of their goal scoring. But yeah, this is a game that, like I said, for Cincinnati, it's a huge opportunity to finally get their first win at TQL Stadium, because not only the fact that they're facing against a team that does not do well on the road, but they're facing a team that, besides the last game that they had, which, even the last game when they lost 5-4, they clearly should have won that one, because they were leading they were leading by 2 goals twice in that game, and they just kind of imploded in the last 15 minutes of the game. And if they don't do that against Montreal, they should be able to get a win against Montreal and finally get their first win at TKO Stadium. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be Inter Miami versus the Chicago Fire. So this is a matchup matchup that I think for both of these teams, they definitely wants to win so that they can potentially make their case to be back in the playoff conversation. For Inter Miami, their record is 4-4-9, and even though they lost 2-0 to NYCFC away, they're still thinking that, knowing they have this stretch where they're going to be playing against team that is similar in their standings, and if they can of course win against them, they can definitely make up ground in the playoff race. Even though when you look in the standings, they're actually kind of away from the playoffs. I think they have like an 8-point gap that they need to make, and their record is 4-4-9. While for the Chicago Fire, they won 1-0 against Columbus at home, and all of a sudden they're back in the playoff conversation with a record of 5-5-9, and I believe they're only like 4 points away from going above the red line. As this game will start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:38 p.m. local time. And like I said, with Inter Miami, the key points is, can they get a win to start a stretch of games where they're going to be playing against teams that are also fighting to get themselves back in the conversation? And there is a saying that when you play against these kind of teams that are fighting for playoff position, it's really a must-win situation. And in some way, if you're Miami, this is kind of a must-win game, knowing the fact that if they want to get themselves back into that conversation, they need to beat these teams that are kind of their rivals in terms of trying to get themselves back above the red line. But for the Chicago Fire, in some way, this could also be a must-win for them too, because they are about to start a really tough stretch where they're going to be on the road for the next 5 games. And knowing the fact that the Fire road record this season has not been good whatsoever, it is very important for them to get off to a winning start. Especially, this might be one of the easiest game from their 5-game road stretch. You would think that they definitely fancy themselves to get a win, to get even closer in terms of potentially going above the red line. But either way, in some way, this is kind of a game I would like to call it the desperation derby, and whoever of course wins this game might have some momentum that they can carry themselves to get themselves closer above the red line. Now, moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be the Philadelphia Union versus NYCFC. So this is another game that I think if there is one game you want to watch in the middle of the week, this is another one of those, because this is a game between two teams that are not only in the playoff position but also two really decent teams. Although for the Union, that being said, their record is 7-7-5, and unfortunately they lost 2-1 to New England away, but that was kind of quite a while ago because they were one of the 3 teams that did not play in the weekend's action. And really, the last game that they played in terms of all competition was against Copa America, where they lost 2-0 against them in the CONCACAF Champions League semi-final first leg. While for NYCFC, they won 2-0 against Inter Miami at home, and they have been in red-hot fuego mode with them winning a lot of games. I think they have won like 4 out of their last 5 games, and because of that, it has propelled themselves all the way up to second in the Eastern Conference with a 9-4-5 record. This game will start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:38 p.m. local time. For the Union, can they continue to snap out of this inconsistent form and get themselves back in contention for second place in the East? I mean, in some way, this inconsistent form has kept the Union from being any further down the table, but the problem is it hasn't really helped them in terms of rising up the table. And knowing the fact that when you also look at the East, and how I also talk about how many times the East is so jam-packed. Well, when you look at 2nd through 7th place, it's only separated by 5 points. So depending on how resort goes each match week, it can really change how the standings of course look. Like, you could be a 7th place team and just above the red line like Montreal, but if you get a winning streak going and the other team around them lose, you can get yourself up to 2nd place. And likewise, it's the same case for NYCFC. If they all of a sudden start to cool off, they can be dropping down the Eastern Conference table, depending on if other team around them win. So in some way, for a lot of these playoff team, excluding New England, because I talked about before, New England is just running away with this logjam that is going on in the East. This is huge games for them, and this is a big game for the Union, where I think if they get a win in this game, they might actually have a chance to leapfrog NYCFC, because I think there's like a 2 or 3 point gap between both of these teams. So yeah, but for NYCFC, again, can they continue this red hot form to fend off against team that is chasing them in second in the East. Again, a lot of teams are chasing for that spot right now, and it's really started to turn into a battle for second place. And even though, second place, I know a lot of people won't take that position, as serious as, let's say, battle for first place, and that second place is kind of the first position where you are not going to get a bye, but it is also a position where you could potentially get there, and you can maybe get home field advantage, maybe even throughout the playoffs, depending on the top team in the East could potentially suffer an upset throughout the playoffs. So that second position is actually pretty important, and we'll see whether or not if NYCFC can hold off those teams. As in these last couple of weeks, I've also seen the second place position has been kind of a musical chair in a little bit, where there's been different teams that have been occupying that second place in the Eastern Conference. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be the Red Bulls versus the Columbus Crew. So you talk about a desperation derby. This is also a desperation derby in the Eastern Conference, as both of these teams are looking to finally end their bad run. And in fact, both of these teams have a combined 9 games without a win, with the Red Bulls losing 4 out of their last 5 and winless in the last 5 games, while Columbus have lost 4 in a row coming into this one. And both teams' record, with the Red Bulls have a 5-4-9 record, and Columbus with a 6-6-7 record. This game will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 8:08 p.m. local time. And really, the key points, again, it feels like somebody's going to have to eventually end their winless run, unless if both of these teams decide to draw each other, which I think a draw is the last thing both of these team wanted, because it just does not help them in terms of end this winless run, and also doesn't help them in terms of trying to get themselves back above the red line. But yeah, if somebody can win this one, they can finally end their winless run that they had in their last 5 games. Well, for the Red Bulls, again, the key points coming into this is that can they rediscover that good home form that they had in the beginning of the season? I mean, I talked about how this team early in the season, they were kind of untouchable whenever they play at Red Bull Arena, but lately that untouchability has been gone for this team, and they have really struggled, not only playing on the road, but now also playing at home at Red Bull Arena, which, if you're a Red Bulls fan, that is got to be very concerning, because of the fact that this team does not do very well on the road. Now, for Columbus, they also are if you're a Crew fan, you're also very concerned, because there's no doubt this team has been underachieving. And some of these guys that have been underachieving are guys like Santos, Diaz, and Zarian. I mean, to be fair, most of these guys have been doing okay this season. They're not having just a complete underachieving season where they're nowhere near as good as their ability is. But that being said, they're also at a time where, when I look at some of these guys like Pedro Santos this season, he also hasn't had a good season when you look at the numbers. And same with Luis Diaz, which I think he's the guy that is really underachieving this season. And then Zarian, I think he has been having a decent season, but definitely not the MVP kind of level that he was back in the playoffs last season. And it's unsurprising the fact that Columbus attack has been struggled, because of all 3 of these this front 3 that hasn't really got going. And not to mention, the back line for Columbus has been an absolute disaster in the last couple of games. I mean, besides the last game where they only give up 1 goal, they doing that 4-game losing streak, they have 3 consecutive games where they give up more than 3 goals. And anytime when you give up 3 goals in a game, most of the time you're not going to get a win in this league. So yeah, for Columbus, they got to sort out their defense. And the good news is they're going to be facing against a Red Bulls team that, on the attack, the Red Bulls are kind of a mediocre kind of team in terms of that form. But that being said, again, coming into this game, both of these teams wants to finally get a win, so that they can definitely get back to winning ways and trying to get themselves back above the red line that they were a couple of months ago. But that being said, I am now going to switch boards and look at the last 5 games that's going to be happening in the Wednesday action. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is FC Dallas versus the Seattle Sounders. And unfortunately, this is another game. I forgot to put the kickoff time for this game, but it will start at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. But the actual kickoff is 7:38 p.m. local time, and this is the first of 3 games that's actually going to be kicking off at the same time. So for Dallas, unfortunately, they lost 2-0 against Sporting KC at home in their last match, and they missed an opportunity to potentially go above the red line if they would have got a win against SKC. But their record is now at 5-6-8. While for the Seattle Sounders, I mean, there's really not much I have to explain what the Sounders did to the Portland Timbers in the last game. I mean, they absolutely embarrassed the Portland Timbers in a historic Cascadia Derby win, and now their record is 10-6-3 and are still keeping in track of SKC in terms of that top spot in the West. But for the key points coming into this game for FC Dallas, now despite the fact that yes, they did lose 2-0 to SKC in the last game, this team has been an absolute nuance in terms of when they face against top team. And I've said it many times before, for whatever reason, when Dallas play against top teams, they play them very hard. And even in that loss against SKC, they really give SKC all they can handle. If it wasn't for their bad finishing, they could have got something out of that game against Sporting KC. So, not only the fact that they have been nuance on top against top team, but add to the fact that the Seattle Sounders coming into this game and the key points for them is there going to be maybe a momentum that they can carry from that historic Cascadia Derby win, or is there going to be a huge letdown? And I feel like the latter is probably the more true because, I know some people will say when you win a big game against your big rival, you can, of course, carry that momentum, which could be the case when you've seen these Cascadia Derby match where I talk about the winner of a Cascadia Derby match tends to not only get a win against their biggest rival, but that can really change their season in a good way. But still, we have also seen times where teams kind of overly celebrate in terms of a big victory that they haven't come off of a very mentally and physical game like the Sounders did against the Timbers. And the very next game, they basically had a huge letdown. So this could be one of those ones that could be the case. But an argument for that is that, how they also the Sounders also got a big win and are the only team that was able to beat Liga MX opponents in the League Cup against Tigres. And then a couple of days ago, they were able to get a big win against the Portland Timbers in the Cascadia Derby. So maybe in some case, the first part is more of the true where maybe the Sounders are not going to have a letdown. But again, they're facing against a team that is known to cause upset against top teams. And I won't be surprised if this is going to be a matchup where Dallas could get the win, because this is what Dallas has been doing, and in some way they really enjoy playing against some of the top teams, which that's something that is the complete opposite of what I usually said about teams that is below the red line, where teams, when they do face against top team, they just feel like, yeah, it's going to be just an automatic L, and they're going to just move on in the next match against teams that could be against a team that is fighting for the playoff position and make sure to get all 3 points. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, and speaking of the Cascadia Derby, I feel for the Portland Timbers. I really do. I mean, this feels absolutely unfair, the fact that, they just come off of a historic embarrassment against the Sounders after losing 6-2 at home, and in a game where in the next one they hope that they might be facing against an easy team to bounce back after that embarrassment. No. How about let's now face against the top team in the West? And oh, by the way, let's do it against them on the road. Like that, I think they must be absolutely pissed off at the MLS scheduler, knowing the fact that now this is going to be probably the worst case scenario for the Timbers to have to go through, where, coming off with such a bad loss against their most hated rival, now they have to face against the top team in the West, that is Sporting KC, which, by the way, they have been red hot lately with a 2-0 win against FC Dallas and have an 11-4-4 record, while the Timbers, as I mentioned, coming off of that historic embarrassment loss against the Sounder in the Cascadia Cup, as they lost 6-2 at home, and their record is now down to 7-2-9. This game will start at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:38 p.m. local time. And in some way, as it is unfair for the Portland Timbers, when you look on the other side for SKC, they definitely can smell blood coming into this game, because they know that the Timbers are probably still shell-shocked in terms of that result, and let's see if they can maybe take advantage of it coming into this game. But really, for the Portland Timbers, as much as this feels absolutely unfair for them to maybe have a bounce-back game, and they have to do it against the top team in the West, can they maybe show that mental toughness? Can they show that, yes, the last loss was really tough, but you got to remember, it's still just one loss, and it one loss, as I mentioned, as much as it is against the biggest rival, it doesn't really end any team's season. And can they maybe have that kind of mindset and just maybe bounce back in this game against an SKC team that, oh, by the way, I forgot to put the C. Oh, I accidentally used a permanent marker here, which that's not good. Now, fortunately, this permanent marker is not that thick, but I can just erase it like this. But yeah, I forgot to put the C there. It's Sporting KC, not Sporting Kansas. But yeah, as I said, it's not going to be easy when they play against an SKC team that is looking to try to get another win to keep themselves at the top of the Western Conference. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be Nashville versus Orlando City. So in the review that I did back on Sunday, I highlight this game as probably the game of the week in terms of the midweek action, and it still is. I mean, when you have two teams that is near the top part of the Eastern Conference, you're definitely going to get a very good matchup, and especially with the way that Nashville has been red hot at home in terms of attack, and they just seems to can't stop scoring at home after they were able to win 5-2 at DC United at home, and they have a record of 7-10-2. Now they have a chance to maybe continue that against an Orlando City team that is not known in terms of giving up goals very easily. And also Orlando was one of the 3 teams that didn't play this weekend, so the record is still at 8-6-4. This game will also start at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 7:38 p.m. local time. And the key points coming into this, as I said, can Nashville, who has been red hot on the attack this season at home, can they continue coming into this game and talk about how red hot their attack is? They have actually scored 15 goals in the last four game. That is Nashville SC at home, and that's something that if I would have told you that last year with how goal scoring was the big issue with this team, you would have completely laughed at me. The fact that Nashville just 1 year span, and the very next year it would be just kind of the complete opposite, where Nashville is a team that struggled to score goals, and then the next year they started to score goals at will, especially at home. Now, that being said, as I mentioned with Orlando, they have a very stingy defense, and this might be one of the toughest defense that Nashville is going to have to deal with. And the question for Orlando is that can that stingy defense shut down this red-hot Nashville attack at home? And yeah, we shall see whether or not if that is going to be the case. And if it is going to be the case, maybe this game could be a little bit low scoring. But if it's not going to be the case, expect this game to be very high scoring too, because Orlando is also a team that's known to score goals too, and we could maybe have something similar to what we saw in that last Nashville game, where of course it was a 7-goal thriller that they had against DC United. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be Austin FC versus the Vancouver Whitecaps. So this is what I call the sad derby of the week, because this is the bottom feeder derby in the Western Conference, with both of these teams being the two teams that is in the basement of the Western Conference, with Austin FC have a record of 4-4-10 and are currently dead last in the West, while Vancouver has a 3-8-7 record and they're second to bottom in the standings. This game will start at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific time, but the actual kickoff is 8:11 p.m. local time. For Austin FC, the reason why they are dead last in the East, or dead last in the West, that is that they've been shut out in 5 of the last 6 games. And I talked about many times before, this team just have not been able to score goals. And anytime when you can't score goals, I know I have to have this old cliche, but yeah, when you don't score goals, you ain't gonna win a lot of games. And it's unsurprised that Austin is suffering that same fate. Now, for the Vancouver Whitecaps, they're also suffering the fate of drawing a tons of games, because they've drawn 5 straight games coming into this one, and if they draw one more time in this game against Austin FC, they would tie the record for the most consecutive draw at any part of the season, which I actually don't know who exactly was the team that set that record, but it's definitely not a record that I think the Whitecaps want to be part of. In fact, in my key points, that's kind of what I said, where, can they avoid getting that dubious honor of getting the most consecutive draws in MLS? And even though you think it's at least something that the Whitecaps will be recognized with it, I'm pretty sure the players do not want be associated with that because, draws isn't really necessarily bad. In fact, draws could be good when you are playing on the road because you can, of course, get points on the road, and especially when you face against tough team and you can get a draw. Sometimes that could be very beneficial. But the problem is, draws also does not help you in terms of rising up the table, and in some way it can really hurt you in terms of dropping points while other team around them were able to get all 3 points. And that's kind of what the Whitecaps are suffering right now, where these 5 draws that they have got are only associated with 5 of the possible 15 points that they had, and while other team around them have also got wins, that also means that their deficit in terms of trying to get themselves back into the playoff conversation is starting to dwindle a little bit. And not to also mention the fact that the players, they don't want to play a game just to draw a game. They want to win a game. So that's another mindset where, the Whitecaps are looking to try to change, where they don't want to be this conservative team that just look for draws at the end of the game and want to get themselves back to winning ways. But they do have a good chance to do so because, again, for Austin FC, they have been really struggling in terms of goal scoring. Although, I will say this, any times when they struggle in terms of goal scoring, especially at home. This season at home, yes, they haven't been scoring a lot of goals. But when they do score goals, they definitely score those goals. Like the 2 times where they were able to get wins at home were in a game where they score more than 3 goals. They won 4-1 against the Timbers and then won 3-2 against Houston. That was the only 2 wins that they ever had at Q2 Stadium. And in some way, it's kind of like a feast or famine kind of situation that Austin FC has when they play at home, where, again, when they do score goals, they can score a ton of goals. But when they don't, they're able to find a way to find the back end that they're probably going to get shut out in that game. So it's going to be interesting to see, is it going to be feast or famine? And if you're an Austin FC fan, you're hoping it's the feast kind of moment where they can maybe score tons of goals against Whitecaps team that doesn't have a lot of confidence. But in many ways, this is kind of a sad derby because of the way that, both of these teams, they're starting to have their season starting to get away from them, and that it's just a matter of time when, if these teams are not able to start winning, it's pretty much in see you next season mode, and they're pretty much done in terms of potentially competing for the playoffs this season in the West. But now moving on into the last game on this board, and that, of course, is RSL versus the Houston Dynamo. So speaking of a team that are desperate in terms of trying to get a win and trying to avoid in that see you next season mode, is the Houston Dynamo, who are winless in the last 12 games, and they're actually 1 away from tying the longest winless run this season in MLS, which San Jose Earthquakes, of course, owns that honor. But for the Dynamo, it just like what the Quakes, of course, they might have a chance maybe to finally end that winless run against a team that they might not able to that you didn't think that it was the team that they might end their winless run. Well, actually, that being said, RSL is a team that is a beatable team, because even though they, of course, won 1-0 against Austin FC at home, there have been times where RSL has looked vulnerable and aren't able to get the victory. But, coming into this game, this one will kick off at 10:30 or start at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, but the actual kickoff is 8:08 p.m. local time. And by the way, RSL is also having the same record as what Columbus had a couple of days ago, where Columbus had the kind of just dead on mediocre mark of 6 wins, 6 draw, and 6 losses. And it seems like RSL is basically having that same case. Although, that being said, RSL, I don't think they would mind knowing the fact that, this season, there was not a lot of expectation that this was supposed to be a playoff team, and yet they're now above the red line right now. So in some way, RSL fans have to be very happy with them exceeding expectation. But the key points coming into this game for RSL, the good news for RSL is that when you look at these next couple of games, they are very easy games that they face. Like, I think these next 5 games, they only face one team that is above the red line, and that one team is the Colorado Rapids, who they know how to beat the Rapids in the Rocky Mountain Cup. So yeah, these next couple of games could be a stretch where RSL can really take advantage of it and start to maybe get themselves higher up the Western Conference table. But for the Houston Dynamo, like I said, is this finally the game that it will end their winless run? I mean, I know the Dynamo probably won't go the entire rest of the season without winning a single game. I mean, if that happens, I would be absolutely shocked that that, of course, is the case. But yeah, my only encouragement for teams that goes through long winless run is that just keep believing. It's going to eventually happen. You're eventually going to snap out of this winless run, and maybe this might be the time where the Dynamo can do it and avoid equaling the same stretch of winless run that the Quakes had, where they go in a season 13 games without a win. But that being said, that is pretty much it for all the games that I preview in terms of the Wednesday action. And as always, let me know in the comments below what do you think of these 11 games. And also, let me know in the comments below your prediction for all 11 of these games. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button. And yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.